Hello everyone. Thank you guys for coming on to our Agile Auckland event tonight. Before we kind of go into the subject, I just want to give a massive shout out to our friends, our new friend, or my new friend, Momentum. I'll let them take it away in terms of talking to us about like some of their facilities that we may or may not need to use. So yeah, leave it to you guys.
Hey guys, I'm Bruce, and then we've got Leanne sitting over the back and Chelsea down here, and then we've got Jules over here. So thanks Jules for setting all of this up.
Pleasure.
That's been awesome, and for any of the, I think from now onwards, both of the toilets are locked. So there's one access tag on the reception desk. Yeah. So just grab that access tag and it'll swipe you in and out. And then if there's a fire drill, the stairs are next to the lift, and that's about it. So after if anyone's interested in using us to help them find jobs, or if anyone wants to give us some jobs to work on, let us know. Otherwise, enjoy the event, guys.
Thank you. So we have traditionally at Agile Auckland where we kind of ask a few questions to help our fellow community members. So just really quickly, anyone here hiring in their company, put your hand up. So there we go. Just a quick shout, your name and company, so people can just come and approach you.
Okay, my name's Kainaat, Westpac.
Nice.
Beth Geraci, Tower Insurance.
Excuse me, a startup.
And
So, Remy, I'm from AA, Automobile Association, not Alcoholics Anonymous.
nice. Awesome. And just quickly, sorry.
Yeah, pretty proud of you doing that.
Say the lady with it. And just one more in the middle here, guys.
Yep, Anthony Harmony.
Yeah. And the other side of the fence, should I use the word fence? The people who are looking at new opportunities, could you put your hand up, and so we can, our potential employees can identify you.
Keeping your hand down.
Yeah. Or just want something different. That's cool as well. All right. Cool. Got that out of the way. So the title of this tonight's kind of event is around chapters, right? And that's something that I'm really passionate about. So my name is Wei. I've just stepped into a chapter lead role at New Zealand Post, and we've been on this journey for the last 9 months. And one of the things I'm really curious about is how other organizations are doing it, and are they getting the benefits from the infamous, notorious Spotify model. So really keen to hear from our guests tonight. So I'm going to introduce them now. So firstly, we have Sam from Genesis. He is a keen diver, so I'm going to go away from the work examples a little bit, just to make them a bit more authentic. So he's a keen diver. You can often see him up north at Port Night, was it? Getting right into the water. It's like a real man, something I should be doing more of. And he's also the tribe lead for digital services at Genesis. So plenty of experience. He's been there for 5 years now, driving change. So really awesome to have Sam with us. And then we have Kainaat, who is the queen of agility, I would say. A personal hero of mine who has helped me a lot, is one of my mentors and someone who I'm very lucky to say is a friend. But she's now the head of Agile at Westpac and helping them on their Agile journey. Journey to agility, sorry. I can't remember the amount of time Westpac's been on their journey, but anyway. So really cool. So just to warm us up a bit more, maybe that you guys talk about where your organizations are at and kind of what are the challenges and stuff that you guys are seeing right now. Sam,
cool. So I guess Genesis is relatively mature for an agile organisation. We've been going for 5-ish years, and we started off with small pockets of Scrum teams, and we've grown that over the years. And I guess the big challenge for us now is as that gets to a reasonable scale within the organisation, how does that interact with the kind of business processes, how the organisation's traditionally worked, and we're coming along with this kind of new way of doing things and breaking lots of old processes, old ways of doing stuff. So that's what we're really thinking about at the moment, is how do we scale without upsetting the organisation.
Westpac. Been on a journey. They've been on a journey for a while, and you kind of sort of look at it and go, we're on like a second wave, I guess, or the like, or sort of going the traditional model, the Spotify model, was put in place. We kind of go over the gaps, what worked, what didn't work. So we're in that phase where we're kind of going, what stuff has worked and what needs to stick, and what needs to improve, and how do we do this in a structured way that we don't disrupt everything else. Obviously, it doesn't always go that smooth, so some portions of the business have gone on their own little journey to kind of go, well, we can solve this for you, and done their own thing. And so now we're tying in, saying how does the whole operating model work together.
So what has been different, like since adopting, chapters, right, versus whatever previous operating models or line management that you guys had? Like what's been the key difference in that you guys have seen, and that's been a real benefit in the business that you guys work in? Please let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough. You can definitely raise the volume.
I think for me, the chapter model is very key to developing the craft and bringing back the focus on what does good coaching look like, what does good Scrum Mastering look like, what does good marketing look like, what does good business analysis look like. And it's all part of building that maturity so that you can get predictable with literacy maturity on those practices. And the better you are at being a BA, or the better you are at being a Scrum Master, or the better you are at being coached, the more clarity you have in terms of when you get to the target state you're trying to get to. Although, mind you, the target state is going to constantly move now, thanks to the world we live in. So, the separation of craft and the doing, I think, has been the biggest of the most positive thing in the chapter model I see.
So I'd say for us actually, it's kind of what ties all of our squads together and lets them be sort of autonomous. So when we first started, we set up all these squads and we went, you guys are autonomous, off you go, and they kind of went off all over the place. And the chapters is really the thread that runs through them and pulls them together, sets those kind of minimum standards, sets the expectations, so that you haven't just got people going off, spinning up their own technology stacks, that kind of thing. That lets us move faster as an organisation, because these teams are really able to run at the pace they should be able to run at, without having to constantly readjust and pull those teams back together.
I couldn't agree with you more. ANZ Post, that's kind of the same thing that we've seen in terms of moving into the chapter model. The fact that we have more autonomy in our teams now. So as a chapter lead, because I'm separated from the delivery, I'm able to spend more time focusing on hiring the right person into those teams, so that those people can do the actual delivery, and obviously remove that conflict of interest. So totally on the same boat in terms of that increased autonomy with the teams. So how do you guys handle, obviously, like chapter leads will have different roles in different organizations. How does that kind of work with, HR and their, I guess, role in people development? How have you guys seen that work or not work at your respective roles?
We have a really close relationship with HR in terms of, we have the likes of contribution models that we build for each craft, and we help understand what does development look like if you're a coach or a Scrum Master and the like, and that's been really valuable. We're still maturing on the practice of understanding how contribution models should be created. For example, we're looking at another chapter at the moment, and it's growing. We're sort of saying, well, who picks the craft and how do we take it to the next level? So that's been that's been the key kind of not artifact, but the relationship with us, with HR. It actually makes the relationship quite easy because it's translatable, and you go, here's a 5-step model. We think we can work with individuals and say they sit at this level or the like.
Yeah.
It makes for a better conversation. You don't have to go role by role, and it's very spread around the place. You actually have some structure, a common structure.
For us, with now, with the way that we work with HR, they're really more like our enablers. So they're like kind of our consultants for some of the issues or challenges that we have. So when we hire, obviously HR will play a big part in the process, but they trust us to craft and understanding what our team needs are. So it's actually helped our relationship with HR versus before HR just drop a person into our teams, and that's kind of who we have to deal with.
So it sounds a little bit different compared to us. So we have a really light touch HR involvement, and the chapter leads are really responsible for making sure that we've got the right people, that those people develop, and they'll be supported by HR, but the focus is really on those chapter leads, and that gives you the kind of control to make sure you've got the kind of the longevity of the people, you've got the right development models, the right skills.
Yeah. So one of the other one of the interesting topics that we're having around at NZ Post is around like how do we assess whether or not a chapter lead is successful, right? Because there's a lot of intangible things that they're helping to build. So obviously craft development is something quite intangible. Like how do I relate that to a business value? How are you guys assessing your chapter leads in terms of what does success look like?
So we, over the last few years, we've set up a chapter maturity model, which is a model that we use across all of our chapters. It says basically lets the chapters self-regulate and say, okay, we think we're at this point in the chapter maturity. These are the kind of things we should do to progress. And it gives us a really good kind of measurement of where they're at, where they're going next, and you can start to see those chapters develop over time. So it's a really good goal to get to. So none of our chapters are like right at the most mature end of the model, but they're all trying to get there, and they're all spending time and investing in trying to improve their chapters.
No, we do not have that maturity. So we've got chapters, and we've actually recently the chapter area leads have kind of got together and said, can we look at building some consistency around how do we do chapter leadership at Westpac? So that's been an open conversation for us, but I might learn a thing or two from your approach around having business majority models in the
And something we've recently introduced is to try and use the same model on the chapter leads. So trying to set up a chapter of chapter leads to go, come on,
Could you just extrapolate a little bit more on that, Sam? Like what is a chapter lead for? Sorry, chapter lead for chapter leads.
So we don't have an official role for it, but it's basically going, hey, you're all chapter leads, and how are you going to develop your craft as chapter leads? Gives them the opportunity to spend some time together and actually think about it, see how.
So kind of like a coach for chapter leads to kind of like refer to, or have.
Yeah, and really just some time for them to work together and work out what what being a good chapter lead means.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as we've been sort of unpicking this chapter lead role, because of the scale we're at, some chapter leads are actually the role is a hat; it's not a full-time role. So that's kind of made it a little bit challenging for us. And we're getting to a point where now we're getting so many people within a chapter that we say this should probably be a full-time chapter lead role. So that's an open discussion. I think when that unwinds, yeah, it would be a good place to maybe look at saying a coach for chapter leads or like. Yeah.
Cool.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'm also really keen to hear from obviously you guys are sitting in that kind of chapter lead position. Like, how do you guys handle because obviously the people under you will always want more development, more time spent developing the craft. How do you balance that with like obviously training is expensive, right? Everything's got a cost. You take a day out, that's a day of your time that's lost, that's not recoverable, and then you add on the fact that there's a training cost, right? So how do you balance that as leaders of these people in the craft?
I think that's where the relationship with HR has been key for us. We've actively been kind of discussing with HR going, we believe we want to take this chapter to this. So for example, for our particular chapter, we've been thinking about saying we want to focus a lot on lean, and we feel like the lean principles about flow and optimizing workflow needs to be a focus for us. We've done great Agile, we've got basic scene, we feel like it's the next wave for us. So we've had that active communication with them. We put it into our contribution model and the craft statements and the like, and then HR has been like, okay, great, let's go out to market and see how much we can invest. So that partnership is really key on sort of demonstrating the value in that investment and how to live it. But when you look at the chapter itself, that's been key.
So we've gone with a bit of a different model. Is we have a concept called chapter time. So it's basically 10% of the chapter's time set aside to work on chapter improvement, and it's the same time for every chapter, so it doesn't really interrupt the flow of work with the squads. So we basically set aside Thursday afternoons, all the chapters get together and spend time working as a chapter. And what that does is it kind of takes away the whole priority conversation, should you be working on this thing or this thing, and just really frees up those chapters to spend time away from their squads and back in their chapters.
Yeah.
We had chapter 10 of Westpac as well, but I think it's over time. But that is the original part of the model.
Yeah. Like it's interesting because right now all the so I lead a group of VAs, and the puzzle I'm trying to figure out is if you want to go on this training course, for example, what's the, like, is it going to bring some sort of tangible value back to New Zealand Post? So if you do this, are we going to either, make more parcels, like, we're going to send more parcels, we're going to receive more parcels, going to get parcels faster, so kind of challenging the people within my chapter so that, it's easier to sell upwards, because ultimately there's a bucket that we're trying to get money from, everyone's trying to get their hands into that kitty, so trying to make it relatable to our business as much as possible. What are some of the qualities that you guys are seeing from as an effective chapter lead? Like, what are some of the key qualities or strengths that you guys would expect?
That's a good one.
For us, it's coaching, so you've got to be really good coaches, and I guess traditionally you might end up in a chapter lead role because you're really good at being a developer, for example, but that's not really good enough. You need to know enough about development, but you also need to be a really good coach.
That's a really good example, though. So do you see that it's actually good to have a chapter lead that isn't an expert in the particular craft?
We definitely don't have any.
Sorry, that's a real naughty question, but we're having that conversation now as well. So
yeah, but we wouldn't pick somebody because they were the most technically expert. It's a balance of technical and coaching, and you don't want to be too far either way, I would guess.
Yeah, so still more that coaching focus.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that the skills, the skill of it, the craft of it is important. You must know at least a high degree of it, and have good experience in this affair to be able to manage that and be able to coach. It's still something that when you think about chapter lead roles and you think about where's the best fit and the health of people and the development of them and where's the best fit and where do you get them to the next level so that the organization gets closer to their target of high performance. It's a very delicate balance, and it can be very taxing on the chapter lead.
It's the reason I asked that one is because I have very limited BA experience, but we experimented with the fact that I have a strong coaching background, so obviously taking more of the route that chapter leads more coaches for the particular people. So now I'm also quite curious, what do you guys think is coming up? What's next in that kind of chapter, either the chapter model or the chapter lead space? Is there a new operating model that we're all going to start salivating over, or is it something more organic and it depends on the organization that you're in?
So we're seeing something interesting at Westpac about portion of the business experimenting with service group models, and they have chapters, but the chapters have no people leadership at all, and they just focus on the craft, and that's it. That's been an interesting experiment to see. We're still kind of seeing which one's better off by running both of them in parallel.
What kind of spurred you guys to experiment that way?
I think I wasn't there with Westpac when the decision was made to move away from the model, but from what I do know is that the tribes in that particular area were too large, and getting that the chapter sitting across such a wide piece, it wasn't gelling together.
Yeah.
And it was a lot more technical focus, so they kind of felt like they needed to focus on services.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting experiment. It's also part of agility. We'll see what lands where.
Nice.
Yeah.
We've actually kind of experimented with no line management and line management, but we
No
found
line management.
well, not no line management.
Whoa. Are you allowed that from legal perspective? Are we breaking up people's contracts?
Just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
No line management within the chapter, and then line management within the chapter. And we found in our organisation, if you don't have line management, the chapter doesn't work. And that is probably specific to Genesis and the way we work.
Make sure that the timing of their recording, no line management doesn't take that screen to my boss that it's REM review time, so make sure that plug that in. So what same question, what spurred you guys to give that just for the sake of experimentation, and how did you guys frame the experiment so that obviously you guys don't go too overboard with autonomy and freedom?
Really for us it's about kind of convenience. So some of these roles are really disparate around the organisation, and a way to get a chapter set up without making scientific changes is actually just have one without line management, and to try getting that up and running and get to the point where you've got something like a chapter, and then you can take the next step and really sell it.
So is it almost like community practice, that community practice of coming together with line management?
I guess it would be a little bit like that, but probably with almost like a dotted line.
Okay, so there is
So some kind of,
Excellent segue, Kate, because I was going to ask, how do you guys differentiate, what's a community or practice or sense of excellence, as some places have it, versus a chapter? Like, what's your differentiation? I can share mine with it. I'll let you guys tackle it first.
For us, the distinguishing factor is that you have line management for the chapters.
We probably don't have a good separation.
Yeah.
So we have some things that we call chapters that are probably closer to communities of practice, and then our chapters have the.
Yeah, I'd love to come out and say something like really like a great differentiator, but to say here, it's just literally like line management. So, all right, interesting. And this is more for me. These are the questions I have. So it's very selfish of me, but I hope that's been useful. You guys enjoy me. Yeah, I got what I want. But I actually still got one thing. So in terms of like so obviously the people within your domain or business unit understands chapters quite well. How have you guys passed that message along to the rest of the business? Because obviously at New Zealand Post, for example, some of our business are still more traditional in their ways of working. They think it's still like more resource pool versus a chapter. So how do you guys kind of make sure that messaging in terms of what the real values of the chapters are is, I guess, permeated across the organization?
I think that's a very good point. And it was kind of in the back of my mind when we were talking about this topic. The other key thing to chapter leads, which is pertinent to its success, is the culture you have in the organization and how well you communicate what that is, especially if you're working at the likes of Westpac, which is just so huge and at such a vast scale that if you want all the chapters to act the same way and have chapter time regularly and you can commit to that and do it the same way, there needs to be really active change management around it. You're constantly communicating, you're constantly saying, all right guys, it's Thursday, it's chapter time, get in your huddles and look at your chapter improvement. Like that needs to be forefront of it all. So that's the culture is.
Because I know that you work at the senior leadership level. What's been the messaging that you pass on to them in terms of like people need chapter time? Like wouldn't they see, especially for a bank, just
yes,
the
there have
dollars
been,
being wasted.
There has been a comment to say, well, delivery is happening, we're not focused on delivery, so I say we can't do this, and those questions come up. They will come up in large corporate, especially if you're banking. That's number 5. Where we're headed. You have to balance that conversation by saying that, the typical saying, to go faster, you kind of got to go slower. So, we've been pitching to them to say that the value in the investment of this is that if we invest now for the next couple of quarters, we'll get the return to move, 3 or 2 times faster in the following ones. But we've had to make a very strategic move to be purposely data-led, to be able to demonstrate that, like I've committed to them and I've said, invest in us, that, invest in developing this capability so that in a couple of quarters you see delivery accelerate by 2.
Yeah.
And then has to be able to show that we
We've
accelerate
been-
delivery by 2.
One of the byproducts of COVID has been obviously, with restricted borders, we can't get the same amount of talent that, we would usually have been able to gather. So in terms of providing an intangible kind of value proposition for employees is, we need to invest in our people, because if we don't invest in our people, then, like another company will, right? Another company with a more mature chapter model, or however you want to call it, will entice them across.
Yeah,
So
at the moment
that's a big
it's
challenge
definitely,
for us.
is it a buyer's market, I guess?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, probably the momentum guys will know. Sam?
I definitely think for us, being able to demonstrate you're investing in the people is really important. I think something else that's been really useful is being able to almost demonstrate real cases where a chapter, had you had a really mature chapter, this problem we're seeing wouldn't have happened. So being able to kind of sell that and have some stakeholder management around it.
Yeah.
Hey, we're seeing these challenges, these problems,
case studies, right?
Yeah,
case
case
studies.
studies.
Right. Nice. So those are my questions that I'd like to help my list. So obviously, I wanted the second half of the session to be more of a collaborative and I want you guys to be involved. So if you guys have any questions for our panelists or even myself, please fire away. Although,
Anyone?
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can't help myself.
Yeah. Here, muscle, let's go.
So I'm a chapter lead as well at Tower. So are you responsible for sourcing the squads? Like, do your people go out and build the delivery teams?
Yeah, so I can answer this one because we're just going through our quarterly planning, so we're making sure people have the right resources. But so we have a 3 weeks before the big room planning that we brought in, we catch up with all the product owners, and basically they come to us and say, hey, these are, I need a QA here, I need a MuleSoft dev here, and basically that's a relationship that we have, so that we stop the teams, but in a way that's impartial, because obviously we know if the project manager or the product owner is hiring the people in, there's going to be that conflict of interest, right? You, as a product owner or project manager, you're not going to give your guy a time to develop, right? You got deliveries to do, like, you ain't got time for that. So that's why we adopted the chapter model, so that we can ensure that it's a bit flatter from a hierarchy point of view, and our people get the development as well as delivering for business.
At Westpac, the chapter leads are responsible for hiring the people, maintaining the craft, the future of it, and then forecasting with the product owners to say, great, we're going to be the product roadmap for the Westpac One app looks like this. We're going to need a lot of UI in the next couple of quarters, so let's get us going. So that planning does happen in chapter.
Okay, so it all goes back to kind of quarterly planning.
Yeah.
Is it the same with Genesis?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the product owners and the chapter leads will work together and work out what skills you need. And I guess our chapters are squads are relatively long-lived, but our chapters try and rotate people around squads to kind of share those skills and move them around. And you might find a squad or a product owner that says, hey, I need this skill. You might actually find that's available somewhere else in your chapter.
You're 100% right, because if you're a product owner that hired someone in for a specific role, right, they could be there for 2 years, 3 years, and you're not going to let them go. They've got the domain knowledge, they've got the expertise. Like, it's not in your best interest to let them move around the business. But if you do the chapter model, like, basically because they report to someone else that's not their direct day-to-day here, there's a bit more autonomy. So we have the rule that you can switch teams at the quarter timeline. So obviously there's adequate handover and some planning around it. And it's, for us, it's been a lot more better for our employees across posts.
And is it self-selection at that quarterly timeline, or do you assign?
So we do it based on, so someone will come in and say, hey, I want to try something new, and they spot and say, I'm not a business unit, and then we kind of figure out, with the product owner what's available. But basically, we do that so that we empower employees and make sure that we're kind of putting their interests as well as well. Doesn't work all the time, but it's kind of what we've landed on, and we're playing with it.
So at Westpac, it is quarterly in essence. It probably should be looking out much further, and we're trying to do that because we kind of want to have like a pipeline, kind of foresight, or that's why the relationship with HR is so close to kind of know, this work is coming up. What has been really interesting has been the change in leadership for us at the moment, which has really shifted the way we prioritize.
Yeah.
So, we kind of went from we want to perform and we want to simplify and we want to fix the bank to we're going to focus on fixing the bank. So all of a sudden, we've been forecasting for a different kind of future and the focus, and now we're kind of going, no, we're going to go back here. So that's been an interesting pivot for us to go, right, so we're now only going to focus on fixing the bank, which means there's a lot of different kinds of skills we wanted, and now we've got all these other people in, which is a completely different kind of skill set, think you want to invent the bank and all that. So it's been an interesting journey this quarter. Yeah.
Thanks.
Question down the back.
I'm interested in a very specific sort of thing. So we've heard a few examples of the chapters where you mentioned BAs. I guess the normal example when you read the literature is UX. You talked about QA people as well. I'd just be interested in hearing about what your chapters actually are and whether there was some that emerged that kind of surprised you.
I would would say that like when we went on the Agile journey, 5 years ago at Post, we organically had Scrum Masters kind of band together because Scrum Masters at that time was at Post wasn't a full-time role. It was actually just a hat that people wore, but because people were invested in the beliefs or the values of Scrum, they naturally gravitated together. And to be honest, I'll say that was kind of the light prototype of what our chapters ended up becoming. So we don't have community of Center of Excellences anymore. They've they've become these chapters to ensure that there's that standard of craft. So we've actually evolved from
so Scrum Masters, that's another
Scrum Masters is a good one, but actually one of the other panelists who can't be here tonight, she works for a big retail group, and they have chapters across their business. So so their I think their retail, some of the call center people, for example, were revolved around it as a chapter. Some of their designers, not from a UX or digital design, but more physical design, had a chapter as well. So they're exploring chapters across a business beyond also traditional technology.
Do you think that will be the way of the future for that model to go across the rest of the organisation?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been having so one thing with the we keep in mind when we talk about these models is the scale at which you work at. So questions around marketers being a chapter. We had products that was a chapter, and these things are coming up more and more so because we're looking at an enterprise-wide end-to-end thing. So we're kind of saying at the moment priorities are set, then they come down to the hub where all the tribe in the neighborhood and the delivery system is. You deliver the piece of work, and then you go, how does this go out back into the bank? So how does this impact our frontline staff? And now we're having a conversation saying, well, how do we put even that top in the end bit as an end-to-end enterprise view of it? And there's been interesting conversation to say, well, is that a chapter? Is strategy a chapter?
In the writing, though, that seems to cover what's sometimes called tribes, which is more related to the kind of business model. So call center, I would have expected would have been a tribe and not a chapter.
But I think the other thing, which I think that the reality of the technology market in New Zealand is that tech people are highly valued, and because of that, and you pair that up with our strong HR laws, right? Around you can't just fire people like in some other countries, right? Companies have to take this more coaching view towards their people in order to give them that value proposition to actually care for them. Because if they don't have some sort of nurturing or coaching, process in their coaching function in the organization, they probably won't be able to get the tech talent that they want. And I think that's probably more isolated with technology.
Okay, I'd still be interested in more examples of what your chapters are. And in particular, whether you only have one developer chapter or whether there's different whether it's, client side or server side, database chapters, more on. I'm interested in details.
Can you give us a quick fire 10, between the two of you?
Yeah.
BAs, QAs,
BAs, QAs, coaching of the chapter, Scrum Master is becoming a chapter, marketing is one, so that's fine from
So I guess we've got development test, BA, standard ones, UX, product ownership, product management, marketing.
Any weird ones?
We've got Salesforce. We have a Salesforce chapter, so that's a weird one. But I think it's important to understand the distinction between a chapter and a team, or delivery team. So as a chapter, the only delivery that you do is the craft, right? But your day-to-day operation, that's with your team. So that distinction, I think, is quite important. And you need to understand that a lot of times, as a chapter lead, you're on the background. So the success is actually most of the time going to be given to the product owner or the delivery team. But your success comes from the fact that you've actually allowed them to succeed.
Right, so, but if you consider developers, right, increasingly in contemporary web development with frameworks and whatnot, there's a distinction between the developers who are focused on front end And so they're really interested in Angular, React, Vue, and the back-end people who are doing more database access and stuff like that. So that would seem to me a kind of a perhaps chapter
I think
distinction.
there's a real danger though if we split that, because obviously we want our teams to be cross-functional, right? That's one of the things that we preach within the Agile community. You want people to be cross-functional. When you split people like too far away, you just do front end, you're too granular, you kind of miss that holistic point of view and also ownership, so then you become reliant on someone else. So
But as a craft, and so at Tower, we do have that specific. We have front end, back end, data analytics, data, we are very specific in our chapters because it is a craft. Because the front end developers don't want to be back end developers, right? And the automation testers don't want to go back to test. So so you can set it up however you want, because it is ultimately about the craft.
Yeah, I was interested in examples exactly to explore this.
And it depends on your scale as well. So if you've got the case for having that granularity, then for sure.
just make sure we give everyone a bit of airtime.
As you know, writing a few blogs, I've written a bit about communities of practice and how that fits in. How does it fit in with the chapter?
So we have community of practice, like I said earlier, we've evolved from the community of practice. So as a chapter, that's what we harness. So one of the things that I do in my BA community is, if anyone is interested in analysis or business analysis specifically, I invite them to our chapter events. So every quarter, I force my chapter members to do a presentation, either on some sort of new skill set that they've learned or the specific domain they operate in. So that, obviously we uplift not just the chapter themselves, but the people who are interested in that particular craft. And obviously, making the maximum use of their time in a nice way.
What if you have say you have a QA chapter, for example, but it's got so many teams and you're scaling, and the line management is in the chapter? Would you split? How would you deal with that if there's too many people in the chapter?
So that's what's happening with myself. So I am the chapter area lead, and then I have 3 chapter leads, and then they have coaches. So that's why I kept saying that the scale is very important. So now we've had this whole conversation about Scrum Masters is me. We want to bring them in. So I'm hiring, if anybody's keen. And we want to build that into a chapter. So we propose that we'll have a Scrum Master chapter lead. And then as we organically grow, we'll go them by each, we call them experience hubs, but it's basically tribes of tribes when they come together.
The next question is going to be, what's the difference between your Agile coaches and Scrum Masters? But we'll take that question. We'll see how we'll take,
So I actually want to go down to the specifics a bit more. So what are the kind of activities that you guys do, just generically speaking, to improve your craft? So not related to your delivery team, just in terms of personal development and chapter development. So what are the kind of activities that you guys do?
I guess it's really specific depending on the chapter. It's not necessarily just about learning more about the specific thing. We have a framework which is about, how do you communicate as a chapter? How do you document things? How do you share information? What are the tools and processes you use? So it's, I guess, quite broad, but specific within your area. So it's about how you set those standards across the organisation.
So did you guys have a team charter session or social contract to sort of figure that out?
For example, I can give you specifics about a chapter session we're having tomorrow.
Right.
We are particularly setting ourselves up just through normal QBR like we would with others, and we're planning our quarter. So we're all coming together for the day. Everybody's flying in from all locations. We've got the day planned to go. We're going to kick off. We're going to revisit our values and principles and mission purpose and go, does it still stick? We learned something from the last quarter that we want to take into place. So we keep redefining our practice and how we operate as a chapter. And it's basically in the spirit of continuous improvement. We keep revisiting and saying, are we doing a good job? And then moving that goalpost that says, at the moment we think this is what good looks like, because we need to up our maturity, or we need to get some value drops out in the market. So whatever the organization's kind of pivot goal is at the moment, we go related to that. What do we want to focus on as a chapter this quarter? And then we'll have questions. We'll say, what if we think about this? We're getting more Scrum Masters in. Should we maybe do a meetup, or should we maybe call some people in to see how others are doing? Do we need to learn more about it? Luckily, we're a big team. So we have a lot of experience, and we've been lucky enough to get some really good people as well. So we've got a lot of experience on board, but in areas where we don't, we're actively taking time out to go out and learn for it, and then bring it back to the chapter. So, for example, the training that we booked at the moment, we've all actively selected it because we've said we want to have a more lean focus. So we've all gone and said we want to do this training, and then we've committed that after the training we'll come back together for a day, and then go, what is it out of this training that we're going to bring back and implement in our ways of working and coach through.
And like, what's really, I think there's a principle that as a chapter lead you must like kind of adhere to, is that like you need to lead by example. Like that's your key differentiator to kind of resource managers of like prior times or in the past. So for us, everyone's got I'm just going to I'll use a different word. Everyone's overhyped around, AWS and jumping up into the cloud. So one of the things we've identified in our chapter is that, we don't really have that skill set. So we're a bit lacking in that area. So as a chapter lead, I'm running lunchtime sessions. We're going through the Udemy videos together. So like every second lunchtime we're doing that together, so that we're kind of, we're upskilling together, but also we're learning and we're making sure that we're holding each other accountable. So if you're not kind of doing that stuff with your chapter members, then you are literally isolating yourself and being in the ivory tower somewhere. So that's something that we do at Post.
I was interested, I'll call it out, a banking system and the power company. How do you keep Agile fresh and, innovative with the startup mindset?
You know what I mean? FYI, yeah. Make sure you get your mail on time. It's okay.
There is a compliance component to what you're doing. I'm always interested in with the Agile approach and meeting compliance. It's always a bit of a challenge. I'm quite interested in how you guys.
So let me replay the question so that I can confirm I got it right. So you're asking, you earlier said how do we keep Agile fresh?
Yeah.
I'm assuming this is a two-part question. So let me answer that first, and then I'll talk about compliance, right? So keeping Agile fresh. Do fill in how you do it. Because how I do it is to sort of make sure I'm participating with leadership, make sure I'm attending meetups, make sure that I'm present in the community, learning and growing myself, and continuously understanding where Agile fits in delivering the organization that value, and being super clear and articulate about that. Like we had the forum today, and the acting new CEO came up, and we had a slider show. I made it a point that I was part of that, and as he's pitching the strategy for the coming quarter, I'm there and present to talk about anything that comes up around our operating model and the principles we deliver by. So there's a question that came up on Slido, which was really funny, and it was just like, are we going to kill Agile to go faster? And I said it under my breath, and I was like, good luck. And so everybody had a laugh, but it's some of those things that you have to just play an active part in making sure it's relevant and it's a conversation that is had, even at the strategy level. So I hope that answered that question. And the second part to your question was compliance-wise. Do you want to actually talk about how do you keep Agile fresh, and then I'll talk about compliance?
Yeah, so it's very similar for us. It's about engaging with the business all the way through the organisation and trying to make sure that we're really clear about articulating why we do things in a certain way and continually doing that. So we're going through an Agile strategy refresh, you would call it at the moment, where we're going from the CEO down and going, well, why are we doing this? What's the point? What are we trying to achieve? And why have we chosen this specific way of doing it rather than some other way over here? And that's really valuable because it's really easy for people to kind of get out of touch and go, well, they do this thing in this way over here, but I have no idea why, and I didn't get any input. And it's almost a continuous thing you've got to do.
The culture and the comms piece is critical. Like I'm really lucky that the acting CEO came in and to that question he said, nope, we're 100% backing Agile, and that's the way we're going. That's a very strong message. And that kind of makes me feel better about myself. And I go, you know what, I am relevant, I am going to do this. And that energy then goes back to my chapter, and then they spread the good vibes, and that's how magic happens. So yeah. On the compliance piece, I'm quite interested because that's been a focus for me for Q3. And so we've had this audit go through saying, when we deliver work, and in the chapter model there's a lot of autonomy. So the audit would kind of come in and said, where is evidence of the fact that this work was delivered, or where is evidence of the fact that this work was quantified, or it was entered somewhere, and you can track and see that the quality of the work and the transparency we're trying to create that ladders up to strategy is visible, right? And so we went in and launched this thing called Common Language. We said every initiative, every epic, everything in the tool that we use needs to mark X, Y, and Z, and we're going to do an audit run on it to make sure that it all complies. So I actually hadn't seen a compliance exercise to that level of detail other than at Westpac. And it's been a key driver in us to actually get a standardized set of practices across such a wide scale. So learning from that is, if the compliance thing does come up, lean into it and leverage it to set those standards, and to have them as your backing to say, you've got to use these 5 fields in your epic field in Jira, because if you don't, audit's going to be up our ass about it. And that's, it's helped me make quite a few good runs on the board. So thanks on it.
Maybe I'll take like one more, just because I know the momentum put such an excellent spread on for us. That you know, we did have a few chats over there. I'm sure Sam and Kainaat will be around for a little bit. So maybe last question, and then we can like navigate.
Like we got time.
Maybe we just sorry.
A couple more.
I love the spread though. I just want to.
I'm
hungry. I'm kidding.
Make it self-interest.
Some that spread.
Isn't that transparency? Okay, so yeah, questions. Yeah.
Bias? I'm really interested to know how you guys, as chapters, and especially in a post-lockdown environment, a lot of our clients, 1 to 4 days people work from home a week. So some companies, it's really common for people just to go in one day a week. So as a chapter lead, and you've got a whole team of people that are spread around the business on various projects, how do you monitor their performance?
Can I just say, I've literally just come back from 7 weeks in Taiwan, so like remote working is like definitely not an issue for us. So in terms of like you said about trust, right? So I don't care what my people do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I do care, but what I'm more conscious of is at the end of the quarter, what's the feedback from your product owner? What's your feedback from your developer about you? What's your feedback from your QA? Like the people that work with you on a day-to-day basis, that's going to be the feedback I look into, not the every week we catch up and you tell me how great you are, because you know, there's always going to be an element of, yeah.
And we still do the weekly catch-ups. They're just over the phone or the like, and it's the tech plays a key role in that, I must say. Having Teams on my phone and it never going down or the like just makes it that much easier for me. It's you know, while I'm on the train coming to work or the like, that I can have a conversation, or you know, and you can be pretty expressive, like there's lots of emojis and gifs.
Try telling a developer at this day and age, like you can't work from home, like you've just like blacklisted yourself. So, Sam?
Yeah, so I guess it's a real challenge because you don't work with people day to day to get that feedback. So it becomes really important to engage with the people that the chapters are working with, and you know, it might be the product owners, it might be the managers around those teams. But getting into that habit of actually getting active feedback, and not just you as the chapter lead, but getting the chapter members to get that feedback themselves is how you put it.
What's really good is because obviously everyone's doing some sort of like Scrum ceremony, right? So our teams at Post, the rule is that like, you know, when there's like a ceremony day, everyone's in the office, and when it's not a ceremony day, then just, you know, free for all. It could be at the mall or what.
Yeah, it's part of that charter exercise, right? Within your chapter, you go, okay, we all agree. So like we have working from home days, and we've said, right, all the everybody who's in the squads, they follow whatever the tribe's rule is around 2 days from home and 3 days from the office. And so they follow that, and then us as chapters kind of just go, great, we're cool with that, so we adjust it that way.
You pretty much have to now.
Yeah.
People won't come and work for you if you don't offer.
Thanks for the heads up. Just up front here, because I know you.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question in regards to, you mentioned flow and cycle time and business value. So almost 10 years ago, we were talking about these things, implementation at Date Communications in Christchurch. So we also looked at Spotify model, and we were very passionate. So I want to know, what is your experience? What are you going through? How do you see conflicting priorities between projects? So as a chapter lead, if you have multiple projects, how do you choose which ones to assign resources?
Yeah, there's one more right there. There you go.
I might draw something.
Oh, yay.
I might draw something for this. So,
How do you capture that cost of delay
yeah,
across
so,
projects?
okay, so it's not that simple an answer. So I kind of go, when I'm working with the tribe leads, I kind of speak to them and I say, think about what the organization is trying to achieve, right? So you need to work really close with strategy, right? Strategy will have some form of, we're targeting to be the best bank in the world. That's a number one priority. We're targeting to increase our, I'm making things up now, but we want to have a 10% increase in our net interest margin, for example, right? We want to be the number one bank and come up with a third priority. We want to have a percentage uplift in NPS. Let's just go with that, right? So based on those three, we go, right, when we have to make a conflicting priority, we first do it based on, do these fit into these three categories? And if they do, then we prioritize them first.
So who makes that call? Is it same group of people or one individual or?
No, so we have a whole strategy team that helps us put this together. They then work with the coaching chapter, or in some places, the ways of working or practices. So ASB has practices, I believe. Or so anything that does around, this is how our operating model works. They engage with them to say, great, now this is how we prioritize, and this is what our focus is for the whole business. Now let's take all the work we're doing and make sure that it is linked to this somehow, right? When you link it, that's where the science behind it comes in. So at a tribe level, we list all the planned work, which is the potential work, and then we run something like a WSGIF on it, which is weighted choice job first against value or the like or the sizes and which one can be hit first, and then we'll go back.
So who's we here? Who assigns the individual? Okay.
And they'll work with the squads to do that. So at a tribe level, you'll have a list of what's their planned work looking like, and then run a WSGIF against it. They could do it at a squad level as well, but then they come in and they say, okay, great. So they do two kinds of comparisons. They go from a capability perspective, where's the waterline? So we know within the people we have, we can kind of tackle these 50 epics. And then you go, if we have more capability, then we can touch these. And then you have another lens to this and you go, so if you tag each of these epics to these, did they all match? And then at the end, when we submit the memo for the quarter, on that we would say, we kind of did our planning. We had 50 epics that we could do within our capability. 30 of them were number one, 10 of them aligned to number two. And then we didn't have people to do this one, right? But we had a few other creative things that we could do. And we had the skills for it in the place, so there's another, what's left? Another 10 that we're gonna do that are unaligned. But we would seek ET approval or the like through this engagement, and we'd say to them, approve these 10 pieces of work that we're going to do that are not really aligned to the priority session, but we have the skill set and we believe it's about waterline we can do as best before. And then at the end of the quarter, you come back to it and you say, did you hit it or not? That's it. Did that make sense?
Yes, I'm just
so when
getting too
you
technical.
think of, yeah, it is really technical. And then we sit on the kind of on the outside and we evaluate and we go, all right, let's look at our throughput for the quarter. We took in, at the moment we're not so mature at it. I'd like to get really, really good at this. I think I have to convince a lot of people to get this scientific about things. But if you look at throughput, you go, each quarter, tribe X takes in 50 epics, and we delivered 13 of them, for example. So each quarter, we present these facts back, and then for the next quarter, we go, all right. So last quarter, we were able to fully get 13 of them out, partially finish some, so where does that go? So all that kind of information, we're now building dashboards that surface the data from Jira to show how our planning is, and then we do a vote of confidence to go, is this something we think we can do, compared to what we were able to do last time, so a little bit of empirical evidence there.
So is there any dashboard for you where if you were to change priorities across projects or assignments, does it show you if we were to make this decision, this is the impact it would create.
That would be great.
That's what we did at the
Yeah, all right, yeah, that'd be great to have that, but no, we're not at that level at the moment. All we've done is we've gone ahead and said, let's just make sure that all the work we have in Jira is linked to, has some transparency to a priority of the business, and we've worked through a whole quarter sitting with strategy team going, give us just 4 priorities, and that's it. And so we've tried to link back every piece of work we've got in the plan to a priority, and then we've run a capability lens over it and the other one, and then we'll do a throughput again and see how well we did. And if it was one capacity. Do you have a more concrete? I have to draw this, and I cannot talk about this in my head.
She's left you half the board.
I can definitely let me know. Do you have more concrete?
Yeah, sure.
Masterclass, you know. Yeah, 20% off when you sign up for the first.
Agile Auckland discount.
Yeah.
So I guess, so we have 11 squads which are organised into tribes, and they're relatively stable, relatively fixed. And then we start with an idea over here, and we want to get it to a customer who sits over here, basically. And we basically go through a ranking process. Every single piece of work ends up on a rank.
Who does the ranking? Sorry.
So it's actually a fairly mechanical process. So we've agreed a framework, and we say this is what we think is the approach we should use, and that will give you an order. And it's really mathematical. Doesn't have any opinion in it at all, which is awesome. And then basically, in theory, these squads will pull in order. What really happens is they put all of this stuff on a roadmap, and then people go, oh, I'm going to get my piece of work here, and then they'll have a bit of a discussion about it, and they'll work out a bit more of a nuanced sequence, and then they'll kind of finalise that roadmap and they'll work on it. What that does is it makes it really obvious if you're a chapter lead and you've got different demands on your people, you look at the list and you go, well, which one's higher, and that's what gets worked on.
So is there a financial element to that position?
Yeah. So it's effectively, we do value versus strategic fit.
How do you standardise value across all of those?
Oh,
yeah.
Question! I was just going to ask that.
So we use a net present value calculation, and finance, we have finance business partners that basically work with the teams to define their ethics, so they define it in a standard way, and we've got a fairly standard calculation that lets us compare them.
So is it financial value or the business value?
So basically financial value on one axis and business value or strategic value on the other.
So my concept was that the business value term should include all the values and it should reflect a single priority method. That if you follow this business value, you would have looked after financial, you would have looked after strategic, you would have looked after all the business value tiles.
Yeah, and effectively that's what we do. We end up with a list in order, and these we basically boil them down to a score, which then gives you a ranking order.
Okay, so that's effectively that rank becomes your business value.
Yes. Yeah. And we actually take a few other things into account. So whether it's a compliance piece of work, for example, then it'll go higher up the list versus
And if it's got a hard date.
And sorry, a question
Yeah,
to both of you.
yeah.
Do you ever feel
You're becoming selfish like me now, bro.
Yes, it's so interesting. I want to get all the knowledge.
Yeah.
So do you ever feel that when these priority decisions are made based on pet projects, favoritism, these rankings actually get corrupted, or you try to assign a number to something where you know that assigning that number will help that
Let me
project?
jump in on this one for you, bro. So we've got a similar framework, and it's not as great as Mercury and Westpac, obviously, Luke. But I think what's one of the most powerful things you can do when you have people playing or some quarterly playing, right, is you get your stakeholders in the room and you marketplace the shit out of it. Get them to make the decision, right? And once all the stakeholders in the room, they make the decision, just record the decision and play it back. That's the easiest way you're going to end. Because no matter how great your prioritization system is, it's always going to change. Someone's always going to try and Sorry.
I've got a different view on that actually. I think that your chapter plays a key, the practice of the chapter plays a key role in making sure that the same prioritization framework is applied and adhered to. And that's why the chapter model is so important, because once you set that standard, setting the standard is not enough. You've got to make sure theory translates into practice as well. So for example, the WSJF model that we've got, it's kind of gotten convoluted in between different tribes across different, what I called hubs. So it ended up being that within one hub, they had another version of WSJF which they were using, which was just theirs. Another one was, adjusting business value based on what they had. Another one's doing a completely different thing. So the chapter plays a key role in making sure that that gets a standard practice. And then, rather than getting everybody in a room, you've got a mechanism in place that you've got to stick to. I think ways of working and your coaches play a key part. And it's probably many people tell me I sound very command and control, and I'm completely fine with that. But but I think you have to be you have to be really pedantic about saying, and you have to have the coaches play that role to go. I understand you might want the business value to be translated differently, and there's probably a case for it, but we've got to adhere to what we want to translate into practice, and get the piece of work where it's documented in a digital fashion, prioritized in the standard it is, to be followed as closely as possible. That's what's going to meticulousness. That's been my word for the meticulousness.
So just last question, guys, because I'm being real thirsty. I'm sure some of us.
Yes or no question. This one.
Oh no, I can't be this one. We'll do it. That guy's been on. Okay. Quick, take two. There you go. Yeah, I'm nice.
So how do you reconcile this model with the autonomy of tribes? In context, I've spent the last couple of years flying around the world consulting to large development organisations with thousands and thousands of technical staff. And we have the model that we found works at scale is different from this model. We're focused on tribes as the unit of scale. It's quite obvious. Sorry, tribes as the unit of autonomy, but tribes as the unit of scale.
Is that a challenge or a question?
The question was how do you reconcile it?
Let me repeat the question. If you're asking how do we reconcile that the model is allowing for autonomy at a tribe level?
Yes.
How that the model is allowing for
And
autonomy?
that scaling happens at a tribe level, and a tribe is responsible for its own improvement.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the decision making being really clear between the chapter product and the I guess the coaching side, and making sure that you've got those kind of three axes.
Yes.
And so we have this theory of you've got the Scrum Masters or the coaches will be looking after how the teams work. You've got the chapters that are looking after who the people are and how they and the craft, and you've got the product ownership, which is looking after what they work on. And those three are kind of the three axes of the people.
Yeah.
Would you guys also say that like there's a real inherent danger if like all ubiquitously across all the tech companies, everyone just decided to adopt tribes? We've found that with our transformation, it's took us 4 years to get to chapters, right? So there's like a lot of like organic growth that needs to happen within your specific context. So like I get the labeling of the tribe, but a lot of times you have to be very understanding of the context that you're in. Not probably a very specific answer, but
I think
it's hard.
in my head, there's 4 things you need to consider. You need to consider the mix of the work. So is it pure products? Is it still a little bit business work? Are you are you delivering inside a business? Is it is it a true agile model that you're going end to end, super digital, super innovative? You can actually start something and see it right to the end seamlessly. So I think that plays a key role in terms of what the product is. Second thing is the maturity of the organization in adopting agile practices. If you're just at the start of this, there'll be many people just trying to get their heads around tribes and the concept of that, and still debating if the way we've cut and sliced and diced the tribes, is that the right way or not? So that will definitely take time for just the whole tribe to form and get to a stage where they're norming or forming, where they can finally get to a point where, okay, great, we kind of know our shape, we've got a suite of products, we specialize here, and this is how work I'm going to come down. So then I think that's the second bit, so maturity. And the third is autonomy is great and should be it. And again, it's probably the command and control side of me coming out right now, but
Funny from you, but
but you've got to be careful about deliberate autonomy as well. You've got to really equip your people with it, and then you've got to go, okay, now you're autonomous. You have everything you need to be autonomous. And that is a long list too. So I've seen the mistake happen many years in my consulting life, where we've kind of gone in and we've been like, no, we're going to be digital, we're going to be super agile, we're going to be cool, everybody's allowed to do whatever the hell they want to do. Go. That's where, yeah. And so it's not really a switch. It's not. I'm trying not to name consultancies, but whoever comes in, whoever comes in and puts in a model, they kind of go, all right, great, here's a training course, and now you're a coach. Here's a training course, and now you're a Scrum Master. And tomorrow you're a tribe lead, and off you go. It takes a lot more than that to make it happen. So there's 3 or 4 lenses to consider in terms of how you balance autonomy with the chapters.
So would you say that the chapter model is one stage in an evolution, probably from a more command control side?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just clear interest, I did the early work for Agile with Westpac as well, so I know that form and things like that.
Okay. So you mentioned it, can you not?
That's all
just
right.
last one in the yeah. Sorry, Luke.
Usually, how big are the chapters in your organization?
So at Genesis, we've got really variable chapter sizes. We've got some that are 3, 4 people, and then some that are 30 odd people. They're probably not really any bigger than that.
Yeah, so we're
really variable.
Yeah, we've got 10. So the largest one is my one is 10, and then the smallest one is 3. So yeah.
Okay, so it depends the skills and
That depends on the scale. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for that. Thank you to the esteemed panelists. Thank you guys for taking the time out. Hopefully, I didn't harass you guys too much. But yeah, can we please give a round of applause to these 2 ladies?